Hello, SuperJardineros, and welcome back to our video mini-series on plant propagation. So this video is the second part, so the second video for session 4. So if you haven't seen the first video for session 4, go ahead and watch that first before watching this one, because it's going to make more sense if you watch them in order. And in session 4, just to do a little recap, we talked about why we propagate from seed. We talked about the reasons why we do that. And we also talked about the parts of a seed, right? So to better understand how they work and how we can help them grow. And now in part 2 of session 4, we're going to talk about a little bit more about the specifics of where to get your seed information, right? So we're going to talk about mainly what are the types of seeds available, and we're going to talk about what information can we find on a seed packet when we're purchasing seeds. So to start off, we're going to talk about the types of seeds that are available. And the reason that we're discussing this is because selecting the type of seed that you use as a gardener or as a greenhouse grower is going to be one of the more important decisions that you make when you're propagating from seed. And this is because, when you have that choice between open pollinated, heirloom, and hybrid varieties, you're going to need to weigh the advantages and the differences of each, right? Because each of these seeds has something to offer depending on a gardener or a grower's needs, interests, and values. So it's really important to learn about the distinctions between the types of seeds and to figure out which one might be best for you as a grower or a gardener. So like I said, there are 3 types of seeds. There's open pollinated, there's heirloom, and there's hybrid. So we're going to take a little time now to discuss a little bit more specifics about each one. So open pollinated seeds are seeds where varieties where pollination occurs by insect, bird, wind, humans, or other natural mechanisms, right? So it's openly pollinated. And because there are no restrictions on the flow of pollen between individuals, open pollinated plants are generally more genetically diverse. And what this means is that open pollinated seeds can have a greater amount of variation in plant populations, and this variation will allow plants to slowly adapt to local growing conditions and climate year to year. So as long as pollen is not shared in between varieties within the same species, so if you have 2 varieties of zucchini, as long as they don't share pollen and they're both open pollinated, then the seed produced for a certain variety will remain true to type year after year, which means that if you're growing Mexican zucchini year after year after year and you make sure that it doesn't get pollinated by any other zucchini, that zucchini variety will remain true to type, and you'll also be able to save seed from it. So if you save seed from it one year as a Mexican zucchini, you plant it, next year you're going to grow the same exact Mexican zucchini, just a little bit more tailored to its specific environment and its specific region where you're in, because of that genetic diversity and because it's getting accustomed to where it's being grown. So that is all about open pollinated varieties. A lot of varieties are open pollinated, and now we're going to talk about a more specific kind of open pollinated variety, which is the heirloom variety. So an heirloom variety is a plant variety that has a history of being passed down within a family or community through generations, right? Similar to the generational sharing of heirloom jewelry or furniture, right? And it is a variety that has been passed down year after year after year and taken care of and repropagated to make sure that its genetic diversity and that variety is being preserved. And an heirloom variety is open pollinated, right? But not all open pollinated varieties are heirloom varieties. It's an important distinction to make. Just because you have an open pollinated variety doesn't mean that it's going to be heirloom. But all heirloom varieties are open pollinated because that is how they are preserved through generations. So those are the first 2 types, open pollinated and heirloom. And the last type is the hybrid seed or the hybrid variety. And hybrid seeds are produced through hybridization, which is a controlled method of pollination in which pollen of 2 different species or 2 different varieties of the same species are crossed by human intervention. So a lot of hybrids are created by humans. And even though hybridization can occur naturally through random crosses, like, you know, if you have two varieties in your garden and they naturally switch pollen, they might create a new hybrid variety. That can happen. But most commercially available hybridized seed, which is often labeled as F1, that's a key distinction. It's a key thing to remember. If you see an F1 variety, that means that it is a hybrid variety. Most of these varieties are deliberately bred, not randomly, by humans to breed a desired trait. And those desired traits can be disease resistance, they can be better productivity, they can be, you know, more robust plant, but they are bred deliberately by humans for those specific traits. And a lot of times, the first generation of a hybridized plant cross also tends to grow better and produce higher yields than the parent varieties due to a phenomenon called hybrid vigor. So if you cross two parent plants, that hybrid plant, that their offspring, that hybrid plant is going to be more productive and more vigorous than either of the two parent varieties. And that's caused by hybrid vigor. However, something very important to remember, very key to remember, is that any seed produced by that offspring, by that hybrid variety, is not going to be true to type, which means that if you save that seed, from the F1 plant, it is going to be genetically unstable and cannot be used for following years. And not only will it not be true to type, but it will be significantly less vigorous than the hybrid parent plant. And this means also that gardeners who use hybrid varieties must purchase new seed every year, correct? Now, hybrid seeds can be stabilized, becoming open pollinated varieties over long periods of time by growing, selecting, and saving the seeds over many years. That is something that can happen, but generally speaking, it is much easier if you're growing a hybrid variety. If you want to grow a hybrid variety, to simply buy a new seed every year. You just have to take into account that that is an extra cost that you will be having to calculate within your costs as well as a greenhouse grower. So now that we've talked about those three varieties, let's talk a little bit more about the information that is available on the seed packets, right, when you purchase any variety of seed. So all experienced growers know that seed packets are not only pretty, but they're like these ones that I have here, but they're also filled with information, right? And this information is going to help them plant a beautiful and bountiful and productive garden. But for that reason, learning how to read a seed packet and learning how to glean that information from these packets is a very important skill when it comes to managing a greenhouse or when you're planning your planting season, right? So I'm going to take you through with these 4 different varieties of seeds from different seed producers and seed providers, what information is generally provided on seed packets, and if it's not on here, if it's not on a certain one, where you'll be able to find that. So the first piece of information that is on seed packets, on almost every seed packet, is the plant name, the description, and an illustration or a photo. So you're going to see here, this is a seed packet from Renee's garden, and you can see very clearly right here the plant name, right? So we know it's an English cucumber and the variety is Chelsea Prize. It also has a short description underneath, but it also has a longer description on the back, as well as more information there. So this seed packet has a ton of information about the variety, right? But we also have this seed packet from a smaller seed company that doesn't have as much information. It does have the name, right? We know it's zucchini, we know it's costata romanesco, but it has one line of description and that's pretty much it. So that's an important distinction between seed packets, right? When you're purchasing seeds, when you're looking at seed packets, knowing where that information and that description is coming from is really important. So on this packet, that description was on the packet. And for the Siskiyou Seeds packet, maybe it's on the website where you purchased it, or it's something that you're going to have to look up separately for a description of that variety. Now, the second piece of information that most seed packets will have is the price and the weight. So on the Renee's Garden packet, we see right down here very clearly the price. We see that it's $3.29, and we also see the weight, right? So the net weight is 500 milligrams. And we will also see that information on this botanical interest packet, and we see that on the front of this one, right? We see that it is $1.89 and that it's 3 grams. But again, for the Siskiyou Seeds, which is a smaller seed company, we don't see that information as prominently displayed. We do see that there are 2 grams of seeds, but the price isn't anywhere on here. What it does have is a QR code that you can scan. So, you know, if you can't find a piece of information on a seed packet, a great way to find more information is to see if they have a website listed, to see if they have a QR code that you can scan, to maybe see if you can find that information on the website or somewhere else. The third piece of information that seed packets are going to have are accreditations, right? So these are things like whether a seed is organically produced, whether it's non-GMO, whether it's fair trade, whether it's heirloom, open pollinated, or hybrid, right? So each of these seed packets has some variation of that. So for the Renee's Garden, we see on the back that it is an F1 variety, right? So we see right here that it's F1. We know that that means that it is a hybrid variety. On the Fairy Morse packet for catgrass, we see that it is non-GMO. On the Siskiyou Seeds, we see that it is an heirloom, right? It says right there, heirloom. And for the kale, we see on the back that it is open pollinated and untreated seed, and that it is non-GMO verified, which means that we can save seed from here and that it is not a GMO variety. So those are some of the accreditations that you should find, and you should be able to find, if you notice, on every single one of these, we were able to find whether it was an open pollinated variety, whether it was, you know, a hybrid, whether it was an heirloom, and that piece of information is generally found very easily on seed packets. So another piece of information is the packed sell-by date. So right on here on the botanical interest packet, we'll see on the back that it was packed for 2019, and we'll see that the sell-by date is December 31st of 2019, right? So that information is very easily visible here, very easily visible on the Renee's Garden, so packed for 2020, sell by, you know, December of 2020, and on the other packets as well. Another piece of information that some packets will have is the hardiness zone, right? So the hardiness zone where you can plant that variety, or maybe at what time you can plant that variety. So on these 3 packets from Renee's Garden, Botanical Interest, and Siskiyou Seeds, we don't really have that information very visible. We do see on Renee's Garden that it says plant in April through June, but that doesn't really help us, because if, you know, you're planting in the northern part of California, the northern part of the United States, it's going to be a very different season than if you're planting in the southern part. But on the Fairy Morse packet, what we do have is we have a little bit of a zone map, kind of, but it tells us more specifically where we can find, or at what time of the year we can plant this variety in different parts of the US. So it'll tell us, you know, in the yellow part, plant it May through June, in the blue part, April through July, in the purple part, you're going to plant March through June, and in the orange part, you're going to plant February through May. So that is a piece of information that's available on this packet, but wasn't easily available on the other 3. The next piece of information is the planting information. And this is really important for greenhouse growers because it's going to tell you when to start seeds indoors, any pre-planting prep that needs to happen, whether you can, it's better to plant indoors or seed directly outside, days to germination, direct or indirect sowing, planting depth, what to thin to, and the shade, right? So right here on the botanical interest, it's a really great source for that information, because it tells us that here, if you want to sow it outside, follow these instructions. If you want to sow it inside, follow these instructions. Days to emergence or germination is 5 to 10 days. Seed depth, 1/4 inch. Seed spacing, a group of 3 seeds every 18 inches. Row spacing every 24 inches, and thinning as well, and when it's going to mature. So these seeds, this packet has a lot of information about that. The Renee's garden also has, you know, whether to put in full sun or shade, when to plant, the depth, the seed spacing, days to germination, days to harvest. And it has, you know, more information on the back of this little flap about starting seeds outdoors, growing notes, and harvest and use, right? But again, the Siskiyou seed packet and the Fairy Morse packet don't have as much good information, right? It's got very limited information, but we can see here that it has general information. And we also have websites where we can potentially find more planting information. And honestly, as long as you have the variety, you can always do your research on your own for that specific variety, for that specific kind of plant or thing that you're growing, and find that information on Google as well. And a lot of them have, another piece of information you might be able to find is plant care, right? So right here we will see on the Renee's garden, it has growing notes. And this tells us how to protect seedlings. It tells us what the cucumber roots might need. It tells us that it needs vertical supports. And that's really key information, really important information to know when we're growing, you know, different seeds. So, you know, it can also tell you other things. It can tell you our days to maturity, bloom, harvest, height of the plant, which is really important if you're planning out the lighting in your garden. It can also tell you soil, moisturizer, and fertilizer. And all of that information, even though it was a mouthful, isn't just important for gardeners when they're planting in their gardens. It's also important for greenhouse growers, right? You want to have that information because when you're selling seedlings to, you know, a store or a garden center, or when you're selling direct to consumer, you as a greenhouse grower, as a provider of these seedlings, want to be able to provide the purchasers with that information, right? You want to be able to tell them, hey, this plant is going to grow 3 feet tall. It's going to roughly provide you with a harvest at this time. You know, these are the plant's needs. This is a variety you can or you can't save seed from this plant, and just different pieces of information like that. So a quick overview of the pieces of information that are provided with seed packets. So you're gonna have, first and foremost, and you can pause this at any time to try to write these down if they're important notes that you want to take. So the first thing they're going to provide is the plant name, the description, and information of that variety, right? And a picture or a photo. The second thing is the price and weight, right? The price of that seed packet and how many grams of seed are in there. The third thing is any accreditations, right? So whether it is non-GMO, certified organic, open pollinated, heirloom, hybrid, all of that fun stuff, fair trade as well. The fourth thing is the packed sell by date, and that's kind of key because it lets you know when you can plant your seedlings, it lets you know when your seeds are most viable, right? If they were planted if they're packed for your year, odds are they're very viable. If they're packed for 2 or 3 years ago, you might want to try to test it out, but odds are they might not be as viable as fresh seeds. The fifth piece of information is the hardiness zone, right? Some packets will have this piece of information on there and they will tell you, okay, this is the hardiness zone that it can be grown in, or this is when it needs to be planted. The sixth piece of planting information the sixth piece of information on the seed is the planting information, right? So how do I germinate it? How do I plant it? What are the conditions that it needs? At what depth? What light? All of that fun stuff. And the seventh piece of information is the planting information, or the plant care information, right? So what does that plant need to grow? How tall is it going to grow? What are its light requirements? All of that fun stuff as well. So 7 key pieces of information. And as we saw, they're going to be varied based on the seed company that you source from, right? So some packets might have a ton of information, and some packets might have very little, but they provide you with a code or a website where you can find more information. So with that, I'd like to challenge you and ask you to take a look at your own seed packets. You know, figure out what information is on your seed packets from those, 7 traits that we talked about. What information is on the seed packets? What is missing on your seed packets? Where can you find that information if it's not on your seed packet? And see if you can find any differences between varieties, right? See if you can find an F1 variety, see if you can find which is a hybrid, see if you can find an open pollinated, and see if you can find an heirloom. Challenge yourself when you're going into garden centers or going through your seed collection to, you know, think about what is the seed packet giving me, and what do I need what information can I pick out from it, and where else might I need to find information about this variety, this plant, this seed. And, you know, also maybe start thinking about, you know, when I'm saving seed, what information do I need to write down so that in the future, when I try to germinate the seed again, it'll be, you know, easy for me to do so because I have that information, right? So maybe consider writing down the name of the plant, the variety, the growing conditions, at what depth, right? Whether it was organic or, you know, a hybrid, or, well, you wouldn't save seed from a hybrid, but open pollinated or heirloom, right? So all that information is really important, and it's going to help you when you're, you know, not only planting, but also when you're selling your seedlings and when you're saving seed. So I challenge you to go and do that. Try to find as much information as you can. See if you can find a seed packet that has all 7 pieces of information. And then come back and share that with us, share that information with us when you come to the Finca. We'd love to hear about what you guys found. And we hope that you guys have a fun time doing a little information scavenger hunt on seed packets. So thank you so much for joining me for part 2 of session 4. And the next video that's going to be up is the part 1 of session 5. So stay tuned for that. Thank you very much and have a great day.